year is 1829, and a little boy named Garland White is born. His mother is named Nancy in Hanover County, Virginia, which is not too far from Richmond. As a little boy, not even quite 10 years old yet, he is sold to a man named Robert Toombs who lives in Georgia. As he is enslaved by Mr. Toombs, he tries initially to escape, but he is unsuccessful in his attempt. Not long after that, Robert Toombs is elected to Congress, and he moves to Washington, D.C., and he takes little Garland with him. Living in Washington, D.C., only a couple of doors down from William Seward. Maybe you remember that name, Congressman Seward at the time. He was an ally of Harriet Tubman and a staunch abolitionist. William Seward helped Garland White to escape from Mr. Toombs and slavery. And because of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, he has to go all the way to Canada. He settles in London, Ontario, which is in Canada. He lives there for quite some time. He learns to read and write. He becomes a minister in the AME church, and he serves a congregation there. Around about 1862, Congress decides that they're no longer going to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And because of that, many fugitive, formerly enslaved persons begin to move back into the United States. Until that time, St. Catharines, Canada had been a haven for escaped slaves. And in fact, Harriet Tubman had taken many of her passengers clear across the bridge, across the Niagara River, to St. Catharines, Canada, where they would be safe. And I think it was around that time that Harriet actually moved her parents, Ben and Rip Ross, back into New York, because the story goes that the Canadian winters were a little bit too cold for them. And so she finally settled in Auburn, New York, which is where she passed away. So Garland moves back to Ohio, in a place not too far from Cleveland, where I'm from, Toledo, Ohio. And as a minister in the AME church, he continues to serve, but he's also an abolitionist, and he starts to recruit men to join the ranks of the Union Army. His first recruiting efforts were for the 54th Massachusetts and then the 55th Massachusetts Regiment, so that their regiment will be built out. Garland wants to be a chaplain in the Union Army. And at that time, the way the military worked, the officers were not assigned to the regiment until the regiment was fully built out. A regiment is about 1,000 men. So he kept recruiting and recruiting. By the time the regiment stood up, the 54th and the 55th, the chaplains were already in place. The officers were already in place. And so he petitioned the governor of Indiana to form a regiment, and he did. The 28th Regiment of the United States Colored Troops. And Garland again starts to recruit. He's recruiting for Ohio, he's recruiting for Indiana, and a few other places. He joins the 28th Regiment as a private, although the chaplain is an officer. But the officers would not be assigned until the regiment was completely built out. So he joins, he musters in, as they say, as a private. And he continues his recruiting efforts. When the regiment is completely complemented and completely built out, he mustered out as a private and mustered back in as an officer. Now, of the more than 200,000 United States colored troops, there were only about 35 African American officers, and 15 of those were chaplains. So Garland White becomes the chaplain of the 28th Regiment. He had been serving in acting chaplain role until it actually happened. Now, the 28th saw combat, and he served along with the hospital corps and the surgeons, providing care and comfort to the sick, the wounded, and the dying. And they served honorably during the Civil War. When Lee retreated from Richmond, and Richmond fell, and Jefferson Davis and all his cabinet scurried out of town. Of the first Union troops to march into Richmond was the 28th United States Colored Troops with Garland White at the head of one of the columns. They marched into Richmond and they took the city. They were there when President Abraham Lincoln also showed up. In fact, Garland gave a speech on Broad Street in Richmond because they asked him to. And it was such a joyful celebration, the fall of Richmond, and of course, eventually the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. When Richmond was liberated, if you remember one of our past videos, I told you about the William Slave Pen in Washington, D.C. Well, Richmond had many. The doors were flung open wide, and hundreds of formerly now enslaved persons filled the streets of Richmond in a joyous celebration. They were praising God for their release. They were praising God for their liberation, for their emancipation. And of course, they wanted to see President Lincoln, who was the great emancipator. These formerly enslaved persons started to look for their relatives, started to look for people whom they had lost contact with, started to make connections, and they didn't have a lot of interactions except for the people who were in the pen where they were. So imagine the scene. Downtown Richmond is full. You have Union Army troops, you have formerly enslaved persons, you have celebrations breaking out everywhere. And then there's a lady named Nancy who is looking for her son, Garland. She starts to ask soldiers, do you know a man named Garland? Do you know a man named Garland H. White? And of course, even in 1,000 men, everyone knows the chaplain. And eventually she finds soldiers who know Garland. She's still not sure this is her son. And they take her and they find Garland, who has not seen his mother since he was about, 7 or 6 years old. Has no idea where she is, no idea what she looks like. And they begin to question him. And he writes this in his memoir. Where are you from? I'm from right here, Hanover County. Where were you sold from? From right here in Richmond. Where were you sold to? I was sold to Georgia. Who were you sold to? A man named Robert Toombs. Where did you leave him? I left him and escaped from him in Washington, D.C. And where did you go? I went to Canada from there. And where did you come back to? I came back to Ohio. And where do you live now? I live in Ohio. And what is your mother's name? My mother's name is Nancy. Garland White, this is your mother, whom you haven't seen in almost a lifetime. That is a story worth any Hollywood script writer's time and attention. That after so many years, a couple of decades, a mother and her son will be united on the tail end of the Civil War. The memorial right here behind me, it's called the Spirit of Freedom. It depicts 3 soldiers of the United States Colored Troops and 1 sailor. The walls surrounding it have the names of the more than 200,000 troops that served in the Union Army. I found Major Garland on the other side of the wall there as part of the 28th United States Colored Troops Infantry. On the back side of the memorial is a soldier and his family. And the theme, the overall theme, is from Civil War to civil rights. Above these soldiers is the angel, the Spirit of Freedom, who is keeping watch over them and protecting them. This is a wonderful memorial to United States colored troops. It's a wonderful memorial to the service and the sacrifice that they gave. Garland White died in 1894. He was a major by the time he mustered out of the United States colored troops. He went back to Toledo, Ohio. He continued to serve a congregation as pastor. He worked alongside of many abolitionists, and after that, after the end of slavery, there were the societies to help formerly enslaved persons to just navigate through all of the things of life they would now need to do. He continued to work in politics. He ran for office a couple times. He died in 1894. He is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. If I were to wax Winston Churchill-esque, I would say that never in the history of America have so many owed so much to so few. 200,000 men served in the ranks of the Union Army in order that they might liberate 4 million enslaved persons. As they marched into battle, they took the hopes and the dreams and the prayers of those enslaved persons, many of them who were way down yonder all by themselves where you couldn't hear nobody pray. They took their prayers and their hopes and their dreams with them into battle. They went into battle in the land of the Pilgrim's Pride. They went into battle in the land where many of their fathers died. Martin Luther King said, land of the Pilgrim's Pride, land where my fathers died. And these soldiers went into battle so that from every mountainside, freedom could in fact reign. And if America is to still be that great country, this must remain true. So let freedom ring. Let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain in Georgia. And let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring from every hill and every mountain, from every state and every city, then we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men, white men, Jews and Gentiles and Protestants and Catholics, be able to speed up that day and singing that words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty. We are free at last. Truth be told, my brothers and sisters, our history can be found anywhere. It's our history. It's everywhere. We'll see you here real soon. Garland White, I found you. Thank you for thinking about us. Thank you for marching off into a faith